educator in geography and history, and also some of you may recognize his photography. We have been chasing Westerly granite for 25 years, I think. There are two sets of books downstairs in the vault. There is the Smith granite books and the New England granite books. And so what we've done is that we look around. He knows more about the database than any person that I know, and has contributed to it immensely. So what we do is we find a place, we go to the order books, we get a list of the monuments or buildings or whatever that are in that particular area, and we take a trip. So we have a little history, a little mystery, and we get to travel.
Nice.
So I think you will enjoy this program as, he's changed it. As you can see, his resources are quite extensive, so please enjoy.
Thank you.
I've been told to speak up since there is no mic. So hopefully I'll be loud enough. The story is going to begin with the great James Goodwin Batterson. He, among many things, because he was a true Renaissance man, he started out as a child with his father's stone business, and his first business was the Batterson Marble Company in the 1840s and 50s. And by 1855, he had enlarged it to include granite. And in 1857, or actually 1856, he wins the contract for one of the first major monuments to an American hero, if you want to use the word. I'd never heard of him. I'm a history guy. But General William Jenkins Worth was buried in Greenwood Cemetery in New York. Nobody, and I've read as much as I can find, no one's really sure why he was buried in New York. Actually, not New York, he was buried in Brooklyn. Brooklyn would want you to know they were a city unto themselves at that time. And, but anyways, he was buried there. Why? We're not sure. And then, at some point, a group got together and decided there needed to be a fitting monument to General Worth. And so, money was raised, contracts were sent out, and Batterson's company, at this point, Batterson Monumental Works, wins the contract. Batterson did not have a quarry. He had a company that could cut the stone, but he didn't have a quarry yet. So he gets his stone from the quarry in Quincy, Massachusetts. And the monument was going to be 50 feet tall. And as Ike Smith would say, it was going to be a built-up obelisk, because that's not all one piece of stone. So the body of General Worth there's a procession. It's moved from Greenwood north across the river into the area of Greenwich Village. If you're familiar with New York City, it's very close to the Flatiron Building on 23rd Street. It resides in Worth Square. Not only is the monument there, but underneath it is the underground tomb that his company built for Worth's remains. This was the only person, and again, we can't figure out why. He's the only person that New York City allowed to be buried outside a cemetery, to have, in essence, his own cemetery. in the city. That wouldn't change until the city allowed them to build Grant's Tomb.
Right, exactly.
And so, he and his wife are the other two, along with General Worth.
Interesting.
And these are a couple of photos that Brenda and I were able to take of what it looks like today. And as you can see, the city takes very good care of Worth Square. It's right at the intersection of Fifth Avenue and Broadway.
Yeah.
That's where Worth Square is. Not exactly a westerly connection, but Madison will very shortly buy a quarry in Westerly and start his Rhode Island granite works. In 1871, Patterson's newly named, he changed the name to New England Granite Works, gets an order from the new town hall in Lexington, Massachusetts. And the town hall wants two statues, one to a Civil War soldier and the other to a Minuteman. And so Patterson gives this job to his head of sculpturing, Carl Henry Conrads. And Carl has already created for Patterson the well-known parade rest soldier for the Civil War statue. You can find his parade rest soldiers scattered across the entire northern part of this country. But he had to create something new for the Minuteman. And this is what he created. This is the actual statue as it sits in what is now referred to as the old town hall, since they built a new one, and this is now a museum. Actually, both of his statues are still there. So he creates that, and it's carved out of marble at this point. Many years later, in 1905, by this time Carl has left New England Granite Works, but another company, the Flint Granite Company, hires him to do another Minuteman, because now this town, Elizabeth, New Jersey, right across the river from New York City, wants a Minuteman statue. And so what Carl merely does is he just takes his old statue and makes this one out of granite. And when he does, it's Westerly granite. The statue this time is Westerly granite. A Berry granite, which Westerly would let you know is an inferior granite, would be the pedestal, but the statue would be Westerly granite. And it memorializes this brief skirmish that the local Minutemen, when they fought against the British as they were landing in 1780. They had come across the river from New York to invade New Jersey yet again, and this time they hoped to bring the Continental Army to battle and soundly and for once and all defeat it. Things did not turn out well for the British. And so, in the end, Elizabeth gets its statue. And it's still there to this day, as you can see. That's an older postcard. Shortly after 1871, of course, the country celebrated its centennial. And the centennial celebration created this real push to memorialize mostly the Civil War, which was fresh in everybody's mind, but also, as you can see from the posters, there were also a lot of interest in the Founding Fathers. And so there was, along with the push for Civil War monuments, a push for others as well. And again, Patterson's company was very well situated to benefit from this. And he often went to his head sculptor, Carl Henry Conrads, And this is the first page of the program for what is considered by many to be either Carl's masterpiece or certainly one of them that he created. And that is his statue to Alexander Hamilton, which is in Central Park. Now, when I was looking up this stuff, I noticed 23rd of November. Well, I've been in this town enough times to know that on certain football games and Turkey Day have been brutal. And I wondered, and then I came across this New York Times article, 3 days, I believe, after the dedication. Visitors who went uptown in public conveyances to see the ceremony had a bleak time of it. The 3rd Avenue elevated road was the most convenient route, but on account of the large fire in the Bowery, passengers from the lower part of the city, which is the most populous, were compelled to walk to Franklin Square and Chatham Square. The 2nd Avenue cars were not heated. Although it was the coldest day of the season and the usual insolence of the employees was increased by the nipping frost. Arrived at the park, these visitors were compelled to make a long detour to reach the statue, not being permitted by the extremely zealous park police to walk through a carriage drive that led straight there. The 500 visitors were well muffled up, and they needed to be, for the wind swept the elevation like a hurricane. So, all I can say is I wouldn't want to be the guy that had to make the speech. Almost the very next year, Batterson wins another contract. This time, it's an actual contract from the military. And they want a statue to General Sylvanus Thayer, who, this statue is to reside in a prominent place in the actual United States Military Academy at West Point. And here you can see Carl Henry Conrad's actual invitation to the ceremony that he received because he, again, gets the job of creating the statue. And again, it's all Westerly granite. And this is the Thayer statue at West Point. And you might ask, well, what's he got to do with the American Revolution? Not much. But he did graduate from the Academy in 1808, and he served during the War of 1812. And the War of 1812 is commonly referred to as the Second War of American Independence. And so that's really the connection. Later on, he goes on to have a long tenure as Commandant of the Academy, and during that, he creates most of the rules, regulations, and traditions that West Point still operates under. So he's like their father figure. In 1884, I came across this, and I didn't actually think it was maybe just a statue to some guy who's going to be buried in a cemetery. But when I looked at it, I said, Sailor's Snug Harbor, what is that? It sounded strange to me. And so when I started researching it, one thing that's not often mentioned in their order books, New England Granite, is who does the sculpting. They just don't mention anything. And I found out that who Batterson chose was not Carl, but a very young Augustus St. Gaudens. And St. Gaudens will go on to become, if not the most respected sculptor in American history, one of them. And many years later, he was interviewed and he was asked about various statues he created, and one of them was, what about the Randall statue? And he looked at the guy that was interviewing him and he said, "Don't mention that damn thing." And that was all he said. Well, that just, I had to find something on this. It was driving me crazy. And I found that originally when the trustees came to him to do the statue, he wanted an allegorical figure of benevolence. He had this whole idea of this female figure that was going, and the trustees said, "No, we don't want that. We want a statue of Randall." Well, St. Gaudens was not happy. So there was no painting of Randall, no sketching of Randall. No one knew really what he looked like. So what St. Gaudens does is he gets a man, dresses him up in colonial clothes, and he says, "You stand over there, I'm going to have to do some work here." And he creates his plaster model for the bronze statue. And this is, of course, the New England Granite Works Westerly granite pedestal. Well, Sailor's Snug Harbor. Randall was, before the Revolution, he was a successful merchant with a fleet of ships. The Revolution comes along, and he asks Congress, the Continental Congress, for letters of marque, and becomes a privateer. And he does very well. By the end of the Revolution, he is one of the wealthiest men in all of the country. And he dies in 1803, and he leaves a great deal of his money to his son to create Sailor's Snug Harbor, a home for down on their luck retired sailors. And he purchases some land in Greenwich Village, farmland, because New York City was really only in Lower Manhattan at the time. And so that's where they start Sailor's Snug Harbor. By 1833, the land is so valuable and the wealthy are willing to pay large sums to build mansions up the only road that goes north. It's known as the Broadway. Then the trustees decide, we're going to sell this land. We're going to move the sailors. And they do. They set up Sailor's Snug Harbor on the northern tip of Staten Island. And there they build this large complex. And by 1884, when this is being built, they have over 1,000 sailors. So they place the statue there. Everything is fine until 1970s roll around. And by that time, Sailor's Snug Harbor needs a lot of work. And they only now have a little more than 100 sailors living there. And so the city of New York wants to take over the property for a cultural center and a park. And the trustees decide we're going to move everyone to a new location and let the city take over this land. But before we do, we're making a replica of our great statue of Randall. So they do. And then they move everyone from New York down to sea level North Carolina. A little village right on the coast. Sea level is actually 4 feet above. But there they are, and they build a nice complex for the sailors and the people taking care of them, and they eventually ship Randall, the statue, down there. So there it is, until 2018, when a hurricane hits. And then, the very next year, they had no sooner repaired, another hurricane hits. And so in December of 2019, they have to close Sailor's Snug Harbor for good. And the statue just sits down there as the building goes vacant, and then gradually various little organizations take rooms within, areas within the building complex. And they finally decide, this statue, this has gotta go. And where does it go? It goes right back to New York City. But they don't want to put it where the cultural center and the park are because the replica's there. What do? What they decide is instead they're going to put it at Throg's Neck in Brooklyn. And you go, why Throg's Neck? Well, the SUNY Maritime College is there. And so they're very happy to get it. And they're thrilled. And so today, that's where you're gonna find it. So, yep, well traveled as and it always was. And New York has two of these statues.
Crazy.
By this time, in the 1880s, Batterson not only has the Westerly quarry right over here, but he's also purchased a quarry in Concord, New Hampshire, that gets him a lot more work. And the state of New Hampshire legislature, in 1886, they want a statue to Daniel Webster. And they want it right outside their state capital. And so he wins the contract and puts Carl in charge of creating this statue to Daniel Webster. And I remember Daniel Webster, but I remember him as representing Massachusetts. So I was like, this is strange. But I haven't been able to find the order for it. But 4 years later, they also want a statue to General John Stark. Again, right outside the Capitol. And again, Batterson wins the contract, Carl gets the job to create the statue, and here's his invitation for that one.
Carl is busy.
What I like about the Stark statue, there it is outside the Capitol, is that Carl someone had already done a bust of Stark's head. So he knew what Stark looked like, he knew what his head was. But the rest of his body, well, he wasn't so sure. But what he did know is he was training another sculptor by the name of John Francis Brines. And so he gets John Francis Brines to stand in for John Stark. So really, when you're looking at this statue, you're looking at the head of John Stark, but the body of John Francis Brines, who, by the way, is buried in Riverbend Cemetery. And
really?
Those two worked quite a few times together for New England. And you can see one of their best examples of their work, teamwork, in Riverbend with the Milner statue. The group statue, Carl is the sculptor, so he gets his name on it. He sculpted it, but Brines cuts it from the granite. So he's the carver, whereas Carl was the sculptor. This is the Daniel Webster one that was ordered previously. And again, I couldn't figure it out until I went looking, and he was, of course, he represented New Hampshire the first time he was in Congress. during the War of 1812, the War of, the Second War of Independence. And he was an outspoken opponent of the war. Why? Because the war was adversely affecting trade in New England. So this is why New Hampshire wants a statue to him. It's for that brief moment in the House. And this is in order because the state of New Hampshire decides within a couple of more years that they like these two statues so much, they want to put them also in the Capitol in Washington, D.C. Because each state is allowed two statues of two people to reside in the Capitol. And this is a letter that was sent by the company to Carl Henry Conrad's wife, explaining why this statue of Stark doesn't look the same as the original. And the reason for that, they say, is because we destroyed that plaster mold. We had to make room. And so Carl has to create a new Stark. But I'm assuming it's still John Francis Bronte's body. But you can see that the Webster statue is the same, only instead of bronze, it's marble. And that's what they look like today. They're in a different part of the Capitol, but they're still there.
Look at that. Yeah, incredible.
And now we can finally get the Smith Granite Company in on the deal. In 1891, they get the order for what is going to be the most magnificent statue made of any of the founding fathers. And the man that they put to work on it is their probably their best known sculptor. And it's Edward Ludwig Albert Pusch or Posh, depending on how, if you ask AI, they'll say it's Pausch.
It looks
Or-
like posh.
It's Posh. Well, whatever. Anyways, according to Ike Smith, who wrote on the back of this is Edward. And another sculptor he is training, Robert Lamar. And that's the Smith the Smith studio. And there's the order for the statue. And this, I have no idea who photographed this, but it's the actual Smith cutting shed, I believe. And if you look closely, you'll see that the legs of the horses have not been completed because it's about to be shipped out to Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh, what they wanted was a statue of the young George Washington, who unfortunately fought in the French and Indian War and was head of the militia from Virginia that traveled along with the British regulars on their ill-fated attempt to wrest what was going to become Pittsburgh from the French. Didn't go so well. But as you can see, George didn't look all that young. But this is the carving, and you wonder about this, why is there a tree stump? And the reason for that is, unlike bronze, a granite equestrian monument, a large one, the weight of George and the horse would be simply too much for three legs to hold. It would be dangerous. So they had to create something. And actually, in Gettysburg, another company will do a cavalry statue out of granite, a large one, and they'll do the same thing all those years later. But anyways, the sculpture was Posh, and the two carvers were the Angelo and Angelo and Columbus Zermarini brothers. Angelo doing most of the work, Columbus assisting. And Angelo's the one that they ship out to Pittsburgh along with the statue because he's got some finishing to do. And they always tell the tale that he quipped that if they give him a couple of more days, he would have made the spurs turn. And you can see that the company was rightly proud of this achievement because there's a very large ad in the trade magazines showing. And this was taken probably in the 1920s or teens, showing you its setting in the park. And one more recently taken. And by the way, just as quick, this statue was hit by a lightning bolt in 2006. And the very top part, the outer top part of the hat and the beak of the bird were damaged. It took them 12 years to find a sculptor, the granite, and get the money to make the repairs. This is another one that drove me nuts. Because I came across this order in the Smith books, and it was going to be placed in Valley Forge, and it was ordered by the state of Rhode Island, and it's this very large, as Ike Smith would say, built-up obelisk of large granite stones, and it's $7,500. Not cheap. So, Brenda and I take a trip. We did not find it. We were all over that park. We did not find it. But what we did find was this monument. This was referred to as the Waterman Monument, and this is what's called the Waterman Monument. So, Waterman was Lieutenant John Waterman, who died of smallpox in April during that long encampment in Valley Forge over the winter. Why him? His is the only grave that was marked. There was a small stone, and cut into it was JW 1778. So that was the reason that the state of Rhode Island got into its head that it wanted a monument for this guy. Well, the story as to why there is no monument. In 1893, the state of Pennsylvania creates Valley Forge State Park. They raised $25,000, and they're going to create a group of people who are going to be the park commission to decide what gets done. Okay? In 1895, Rhode Island sends a delegation to see the governor, to see the park commission, and to see if they can't get their small monument placed at Waterman's grave. Waterman's grave is right about there. Well, there was only one problem in 1895. The park had not yet bought the land. It was owned by a farmer named Heston Todd. He was one of the original members of the Park Commission in 1893. They were all hired for 5-year terms by the governor, a man who happened to be a Democrat. In 1895, 2 years later, he's no longer governor. The new governor is a Republican. And that Republican removes Todd from the Park Commission. So, when the Rhode Island delegation and the governor's representative and the Park Commission all come knocking on Heston Todd's door, Heston Todd greets the Rhode Island Park the Rhode Island people, and says, I'd love to let you put a monument. I think that's a great idea. Yeah, only one small condition. The Park Commission can have nothing to do with this. The governor of Pennsylvania can have nothing to do with this. It can never be part of the park. This is just for Rhode Island. Well, that went over with the Park Commission like a lead balloon. And then they haggled for 2 years, till 1897. And at that point, the Park Commission convinces the state of Rhode Island that they have a better spot for them. And that would be at what was known as Redoubt 1, which is where the 2nd Rhode Island Brigade defended the encampment during the winter. So this is nicer. And at that same year, 1897, Rhode Island changes its mind and says, we need a bigger monument. Which is why they give the Smith Granite Company the order for this very large monument, costing a great deal more money. One problem, Park doesn't own the land. It's owned by William Stevens, another farmer. And when they all go to him in 1897, at that very same time, the Daughters of the American Revolution show up at Heston Todd's door. They want a monument, not just to Waterman, but to all the brave soldiers that gave their life during the encampment. And Heston Todd says, I think that's a wonderful idea. And they begin to raise money, and once they've raised the money, they send out the contract, and by 1901, they have their monument right there, near Waterman's body, because by this time, someone has taken the marker. They took the marker because they thought it would be nice to put it in a museum. But when they took it, now nobody knows exactly where he was buried. So, you know, it's like, oh, well, this is pretty general area. So that's where that, by 1901, that monument goes up. What happened at Redoubt 1? Stevens is approached, and he tells him, you want to take another acre of my land? You haven't paid me for the acres you've already taken from me. You owe me $2,100. Why should I give you another acre for your monument? And so he tells him, I'll take you to court. The minute he filed the court case, everything was put on hold. Rhode Island couldn't do a thing. The case gets heard in 1902. By that time, the other monument is already up, and the court case goes against the park. They fine for the farmer, and he gets $2,100 that is owed him. Within 2 years of that, the park is so angry at how this is all turned out, they tell Rhode Island, you're never going to get a monument here. We'll never let that happen. And Rhode Island's like, what did we do? And finally, in 1912, they just give up completely trying to get anything to happen. So the monument never happened. But it's a good story. This is the third Westerly company that gets to do a monument. And it's the Joseph Newell and Company. And I found this completely by accident. I was going through stone journals like I usually do, looking for Westerly stuff. And in this one, granite, marble, and bronze, I came across a very unusual thing. An entire page dedicated to Westerly granite. This is very rare in these journals. Huge paragraph on Joseph Newell and Company. Another one on the Gorley Granite Works. 2 lesser paragraphs on New England Granite Works, a large one on the old Crum Quarry Works, which is under new ownership, Sullivan, John B. Sullivan and Son, and his partner, Frederick Barnaco, who was out of Quincy, Massachusetts. They're now in business with that. There's a mention of the Chapman Quarry. There's a mention of Kaduri and Marzoli. And finally, Andrew Newell and Sons. So, I mean, this is rare to get this much on Westerly. But what really caught my attention was that Newell was going to do a tea burning monument. And I said, well, that's strange. And so here it is. Greenwich, New Jersey ordered it. They wanted to have a monument to their tea burning on the 22nd of December, 1774. That's almost a year to the day after the Boston Tea Party. And so the people of Greenwich would like you to know that although Boston had a party, we burned the thing down. Because it had already been offloaded and the storage barn was burned. By the early 1920s, about 100 years after the War of 1812, the Second War of American Independence, and the fact that they had become newly allies and fought in World War I, or as they would have said, the war to end all wars, it was decided by the two countries that they would swap monuments. In other words, they would have America make replicas of a couple of monuments to their founding fathers that would be placed over in London or somewhere in Great Britain. And Great Britain would send a couple of their replicas of a couple of their statues to America. And so, again, the New England Granite Works gets an order for the pedestal for one of these statues that is going to go in Washington, D.C. And this is also in November, but as you can tell, it's no November like New York had. These guys are not, it doesn't look cold at all. They hire this young sculptor to do the pedestal. And as pedestals go, that's pretty basic.
Yeah.
And that's just a replica of Burke, who was a famous statesman. Before the Revolutionary War, he tried to convince Parliament that it shouldn't be doing what it's doing, that it will not end well for them if you treat the colonies this way. And then after the war, he was trying to convince them, if you continue to do what you're doing, there's going to be another war. So I suppose he's a fitting statue. And last but not least, in 1925, the Smith Granite Company gets another order to do a monument. This time the order is made by the actual sculptor, John F. Paramino, who's going to do it. Smith supplies the 3 blocks of granite. And so what he does is he creates a model of that famous painting of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which will be turned into this bronze tablet. And then he also carves the cap that's going on top of it. And that's, you can still see that today in Boston Commons. And that's the last of the monuments to the founding of the country that I have found.
Thank you.